Another news story came out from Sibel Edmonds. Obama secretly preparing for Syria invention. It's actually not much of a secret because they've been talking about it for 6 months. This so-called Syria opposition, which is another made-up, U.S. propped-up fake group to overthrow the Syrian government, to bring them into the slavery of the IMF, and to open another corridor for the attack on Iran. That's what's going on here. Russia and China have already indicated they will not allow an attack on Iran. It's an important trading partner. It's an important source of oil. China and Russia have played Neville Chamberlain to the United States Reich, and they're drawing a line in the sand. Russia was just testing some new long-range ballistic missiles. It's another message they're saying. We are getting ready to fight back if you push this any further. Fortunately, the money junkies don't care. They've got their bunkers. Sure, let it all blow. Israel would be happy as all heck for the Christians and the Muslims to kill each other off, or, more to the point, for the Americans and the Russians to nuke each other to death, which would leave Israel and their nuclear arsenal basically in charge of the world. And then the Messiah will come, because we own it all. All righty, let's see here. Now, I want to talk about Iran, because obviously the push is on there. The U.S. Navy is now basically crowding Iran's drill. You know, it's, like two kids in high school, and they keep nudging each other and bumping into each other, trying to force the other one to do something. That's what's going on here. You know, and the U.S. is saying, we will act if you close the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran is saying, we will close the Strait of Hormuz if you attack us. And by the way, economic sanctions are a form of warfare. It's called economic warfare. When the U.S. places sanctions on Iran, that is the opening attack. And Iran has every right to defend themselves by any means possible. Iran is out there screaming the United States is in no position to give orders on the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran is absolutely right. You know why? It's Iran's territorial waters. It's their home court. It's their border. The United States has no real right to be anywhere in that part of the world other than power projection and because Israel told us to. How would you feel if, let's say, the Russians had their aircraft carriers and cruise missile ships, fleet support vehicles, missile launchers, everything, cruising around the Gulf of Mexico? How would you feel about that? If they were so close that you could stand there in Texas, look out across Galveston Bay, and see the Russians cruising in the Gulf of Mexico, would you be comfortable with that? Because that's what the Iranians are having to look at. It's their country, their water, their territorial waters, and these ships from the other side of the planet are out there polishing their guns and oiling the missile launchers. You tell me who is the belligerent, who is the hostile, who is the aggressor. Now, the latest news that we have is that leave has just been canceled for what are called the arsenal ships in Bremerton, Washington. Now, what an arsenal ship is an Ohio-class nuclear ballistic missile submarine. It's got 24 launching tubes that can fire the Trident MIRVed ballistic missile. But because of the START II treaty, the United States, under treaty requirement, is only allowed to build ballistic missile launching submarines that only carry, I think it's either 12 or 16 missiles. So these older Ohios are obsolete, but they've been put to another use. And when we come back from these commercials, I will tell you exactly what they have been modified to do and why it is such a warning sign for the world.
Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about this news that just came in where one of the U.S. arsenal ships has departed for the Persian Gulf. Apparently, it was a sudden announcement. Leaves were canceled. It's already underway. Supplies are being the supplies that didn't get on board in time are being taken out to it by helicopter. So they're in a real rush here. So to give you the backstory about what they mean by this thing, this is an old Ohio-class SSBN, which according to the people who work on it means Saturdays, Sundays, and a bunch of nights, because it's hard to keep them running. And they are designed and built to launch 24 Trident ballistic missiles around the globe, each of which carries, I think they're allowed under treaty, 8 independent warheads. Under the START II treaty, submarines that are carrying 24 missiles are no longer allowed. So there's a new generation of ballistic missile submarines being built, which you're paying for, that will carry, I think it's 16. Okay? So rather than scrap those older Ohio-class submarines, what the U.S. government did is they took out the Trident missiles, and into each one of those tubes, 22 of them, the other tube had to be set aside for additional electronics, but into those 22 tubes they put what are called vertical launching assemblies. And it's 7 launch cells, 6 in a ring, 1 in the middle, that hold Tomahawk cruise missiles. They're called TLAMs, Tomahawk Land Attack Missiles. 154 in a single boat. And these TLAMs can be armed with nuclear warheads. So basically, just one of these submarines can wipe out 154 cities in a targeted country. And it's on its way to the Persian Gulf right now. Remember, with all this talk about Iraq's nuclear weapons, which they didn't have, and Syria's nuclear weapons, which they didn't have, and Iran's nuclear weapons, which they don't have, one and only one nation has actually dared use a nuclear weapon of mass destruction on the civilians of another country. And that's the United States. We all know this war is based on lies and deceptions. Just like the lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons. Just like the lies about the mine in Havana Harbor that sank the USS Maine. Just like the lies about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Just like the lies that Pearl Harbor was a surprise. Every world leader, every government, every king, every tyrant that wants to start a war lies their people to trick them into going along with it. And that's what they're doing right now. Alrighty, let's see. Moving right along here. Over in Lebanon, as you know, Israel's getting ready to launch Cast-Lead 2, and they're getting ready to throw bombs and stuff in every direction, which you've paid for. Thank goodness they don't have those Patriot missiles anymore. They sold those things to China. But Lebanon's prime minister is saying that there's no solid evidence that there's any Al-Qaeda anywhere in Lebanon. And, so please don't attack and bomb us because we're not here. And Israel, I'm sure, is saying something along the lines about, have patience already. Adam Perlman and Joseph Cohen are still getting through TSA. They'll be there. Relax. And again, it's the way this thing is going on. Create the illusion of a threat or a danger and launch an attack. Remember, Al-Qaeda it's a hoax. I know there are people out there, patsies and dupes, who think they're members of Al-Qaeda and don't realize they're really working for Mossad and the CIA. But Al-Qaeda in Arabic slang means the toilet, which means this whole thing was thought up by somebody who had some familiarity with the Arabic language but no exposure to colloquialisms. In other words, some bozo at CIA. I mean, the story I have is that Al-Qaeda originally came off a drawer at CIA, file cabinet drawer, where they had the database of the Mujahideen fighters that were helping the U.S. against the Soviet Union. But it means toilet in Arabic slang. Hi, we're from the toilet. We're here to blow up your buildings. And everybody starts snickering. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there's this scandal brewing where Israel sold Patriot missiles given to them by the United States, paid for by you, the latest and greatest, the PAC-3, the new improved model, and they sold them to China. And it's not just a question of where did the missiles go, but China obviously is going to take those missiles apart and reverse engineer them. at a time when the U.S. is, provoking war with China. We don't want China to know how the Patriot works, and Israel just basically betrayed us to them. This is exactly a repeat of what happened when Jonathan Pollard was stealing America's nuclear defense secrets, giving them to Israel. Israel turned around, gave them to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas for Jews to go to Israel. And had Russia actually really wanted to attack the United States and destroy it, it could have done so at that time pretty much with impunity. So much for our friends in the Middle East here. And they're doing it again. Now, here's the interesting part that came out today. Israel has demanded that Germany cop to selling the missiles to China. And apparently Netanyahu has called up Merkel and said, you have to take the blame for this so that we can save Israel from a potential spy scandal. In other words, Israel wants to do what they're doing. They just don't want to be caught about it. Remember, like yesterday, we were talking about this report out of the European Union talking about how Arabs living in Israel are discriminated against. In other news, the sun also rises in the morning. And Israel got all upset. They enacted the discriminatory policies. They enacted the apartheid. They just don't want anybody to talk about it. They're worried about their image. They don't care what the truth on the ground is all about. They just want to look good to the world. So, meanwhile, and it's not working, because Israel's diplomats around the world, the envoys, apparently they had a big confab where they all got together and had a conference and said basically Israel's image around the world is continuing to deteriorate. Good. Truth is winning out over public relations. Israel's running around screaming that they don't want to be, treated like they're pariahs. They should stop acting like pariahs. You can't have it both ways in the age of the internet. Israel, like the American political system, like the corporate media, like corporations in general, like the church, used to be able to survive because they could lie to the public with impunity. They could say anything they wanted to say, make up any fantastic story. The media would propagandize it to the people, and that would be the end of it. The people would have no choice but to believe what they were told. Yes, I whipped the Hittites up at Kadesh. But they don't have that anymore because of the internet, because of the blogosphere, because of the alternative media. Israel is no longer able to lie to the world with impunity. Just like Wall Street is no longer able to lie to the world with impunity. Obama is no longer able to lie to the world with impunity. We are in the middle of this major social transformation where the old methods of ruling the population through lies and deception and fraud simply will not work any longer. It is a repeat of the social upheaval that attended Gutenberg's reinvention, rediscovery of movable type printing that brought affordable books to the population and increased literacy, and people started reading for themselves things like the Bible and saying, wait a minute, the bishop's full of it. This isn't what the Bible says at all. And the power structures back in Gutenberg's time tried to find some way to shut it down, and they failed, ultimately. Just as attempts to shut the internet and the blogosphere down are doomed to fail today. It's not going to be smooth sailing, because the money junkies don't give up and they like to fight dirty. But in the long run, the age where governments ruled through lies and fraud and deception is over. Those governments able to evolve to meet the new reality will survive. Those governments unable to evolve to meet the new reality must go extinct.